Hi, everyone, and welcome to Chazey Partners RPA episodes. This is the 4th edition of our video series. Joining me today is Chuy Michel, our head of global RPA for Chazey Partners, and my name is Jim Jameson. I am the RPA delivery manager for Chazey Partners. And today we're going to discuss centers of excellence, how to establish some of the pros and cons of the different models, some of the roles required, and just a general understanding of what centers of excellence provide for an organization in terms of RPA. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chuy and let him kind of give you an idea of what center of excellence is, and then we'll move forward. Chuy.
Thank you, Jim, and happy to be here with you again in the 4th episode. As you mentioned, we're going to speak to centers of excellence and why are they important. Before we do that, at Chazey, we always like to see RPA as end-to-end implementation. So ranging from process durability assessment to pilots and proof of concept, making sure that you have an agile development practice, managed services, and last but not least, the topic of today, which is centers of excellence. And speaking a little bit about centers of excellence, before I jump into definitions, Jim, I'd like to ask your opinion on one thing.
Okay.
Do you need a center of excellence to launch an RPA program?
You do not. And most companies that we've worked with don't have a center of excellence, but it becomes more and more important as you scale your RPA capabilities, right? And so again, we start with proof of concepts, we start with pilots, we help people get a roadmap, right, to develop an initial pipeline. And then, then we start talking about centers of excellence in order to maintain the momentum they build through those efforts. Way to put me on the spot.
Great answer. We didn't practice for this, by the way. So yeah, in essence, scale is the key word, Jim. Right? As you mentioned, you can launch a program, you can run pilots, you can have a few bots here and there, but once you're really serious about growing your RPA program, a center of excellence becomes a must. Mm-hmm. And when I think about centers of excellence, at the end of the day, it's a governed body, right? And it's a governed body, and it's not a necessary bureaucracy built in the organization, but rather an agile, right, very simple layer of professionals focused on end-to-end life cycle management of automation, providing best practices, providing the infrastructure, providing the insights. And it's not about people, right? It's a combination of having proper processes in place from an intake perspective, evaluation perspective, communicating back to the business, jumping and deciding which ideas of automation are going to become true automation, combining those processes with the right set of skills in the center, with technology, and that can shift the mindset of the enterprise of simple isolated automation to an end-to-end program. And even if your RPA program is still tactical in the enterprise, a center of excellence and this scalability that we just mentioned, it's a key enabler. So RPA and other converging technologies, hyper automation technologies, can really become the center and can really become a critical component of the digital transformation of any given enterprise. So yeah, that's in a nutshell the definition, right? So let's jump to the next question. Jim, is there only one way to set up a CoE? Said in other words, is there a single operating model or recommended approach to setting up CoEs, or you can think of different ones?
No, actually there's a few different methods that you can, or models that you can follow, right? You can do a centralized, right, where you have one team that handles all of that. And I really relate this back to in most companies you have an IT service management, right? Going back to and change management specifically, right, is usually the governing body. setting the processes and best practices for an organization in terms of how you document and implement changes. Well, this is the very similar in terms of governance and guidance. And one of the key things that you mentioned earlier was about communication, constant communication about what the capabilities are and what the requirements are. I would say that the standards are also important, right? Making sure you have some standard documentation, a standard input method. Those all relate to that. And regardless of the operating model, so you have a centralized where you have one centralized location, everything feeds through that, right? The advantage is that it's consistent, if you will, right?
Mhm.
But it can also be a roadblock to some perspective because you have everything coming into one location. Then you could also have like a federated model where you have an overarching governance, right? But you kind of farm it out to individuals within the organization that take the same mindset as the governance, right? But then a disadvantage of that is that really becomes important for communication, right? You have to make sure that everyone that is handling the federated model, right, is communicating with the centralized governing body. So each has its advantages and disadvantages. And I would say that most organizations will always start central, right, with a centralized model. Because when you're building something, think about it, when you're building something, you want to be able to have some controls and develop those good techniques, right? Those standards. And that allows you to maybe branch out in the future. And quite honestly, there's the third is a hybrid approach where you have centralized and federated together. But again, the communication, constantly communicating what the standards are, intake methodologies, the tooling. Now, one thing that for us is we don't get caught up in the tooling, right? As a third party, as a vendor, we can obviously have ideas, right, and give people the pros and cons of different software products. But at the end of the day, we will code according to whatever the client wants, right? The software package that they want to go with. So when we talk about which software, I mean, each organization is going to be something different as well, right? And so when you create standards, and I'll give you an example. So maybe a solution that was done through Power Automate Desktop doesn't, and it's attended, isn't going to have the same documentation requirements as an attended bot, right? That's done through UiPath, simply because that would be unattended, if you will. And so you don't have operations maintaining or monitoring that particular bot. It's more of a desktop automation. So it just depends on the organization, what kind of standards you need to develop. The one thing that you do have to be careful of is the the common user that's not a developer, right? That wants to create their automations. You want to make sure, and that's fine to allow that to happen in an organization, but you want to be careful to make sure that doesn't disrupt your organizational automations. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree. And I think that you hit on a very important point, James, which is there are different options, right? And none is perfect, by the way. And this is not a destination. So the model you pick, either federated, centralized, or hybrid, doesn't necessarily mean you need to stay there, right? So just when you think about an RPA program growing and scaling, your operating model, it's an ever evolving model, right? So as you mentioned, you may start central, but then you may decide that you want to decentralize some of the less value added activities, such as low complexity automation. So you decide as a center of excellence that you don't want no more to be dealing with very straightforward, simple, low complexity automations, that right. The business is better suited at and more agile and at driving their low complexity automation themselves. And then you end up dealing with a hybrid model, right? Where you have this central entity, domain or major center of excellence, and then satellite groups developing lower complexity automation. So I guess the key takeaway from a operating model perspective is you need to pick one for sure. You need to have a COE for sure if you're planning to scale, but don't think about if you pick one, then you need to stay there forever. Then if we think about the operating model, that's your process. Intake, how do you evaluate ideas? How do you develop the right set of documentation, maintenance, and support? But you need people, right? You need trained professionals to run the series. And you and I know, right? You need your sponsor. There needs to be a champion manager. You need developers. You need business analysts. You need solution architects. So it would seem, just by the number of roles that you and I, Jim, been dealing with, right, within Chazey and with clients, it would seem like a very large organization. So are we really saying, or are we really bringing forward an idea that says a COE is going to become, a very large team dealing with everything that happens within the company from an automation point of view? And how do we embed this agile, right, perspective to the setup of the team, Jim?
Yeah, that's a good question. And just to answer that with, in terms of the types of roles that are involved in a COE, you have to refer to them as hats, right? They're different hats that people put on and take off depending on the size of the organization. And not every organization may have the exact same roles, right? You may have IT SMEs, you may have process SMEs, you may or may not have RPA supervisors, as an example. But there are many roles depending on how, and large organizations may actually have all these roles as individuals. But for smaller companies just starting out, you need to take some of the key roles. You need to definitely have architecture, right? You need to have developers, you need to have business analysts, but you can start small and expand as your organization expands and adopts your RPA practice.
I totally agree. And operating models and roles, they're not plug and play, right? They are right. Very dependent upon the existing organization in the company. So even in many of the clients we're working with, we are not creating new roles from scratch, but rather we are evolving existing roles. Let's say, example, right? In the past, we had subject matter experts from a process perspective, and now we're retraining subject matter experts so they become the business analysts of RPA. And hey, by the way, are they gonna stop doing what they were doing from an SME point of view? No, they're just adding a new layer of activities that at the end of the day, it comes very nicely, right, to the existing projects that SMEs had in the past. But with this layer of technology, automation technology like RPA, and the new set of skills added to that individual, they now became champions of RPA, or now they became senior business analysts of RPA. So one trend that we're definitely seeing in the marketplace is that many roles in the organization. Another example is continuous improvement, right? So continuous improvement analysts are adding automation skills to their skill set, and then they're becoming continuous improvement and automation champions, right? So it's the combination of adding key roles to the organization and the COE setup, but also taking advantage and leveraging existing roles and modifying and evolving these roles so they become part of the COE, either in a formal structure or in a matrix structure.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because one of the things that we always hear when we're talking to our clients, and especially about the organizational change management communication that goes along with implementing an automation program, is first thing people think is, oh, I'm going to lose my job. Well, that's not necessarily the case. We're going to help make people more efficient in certain areas, and the skills, as you said, that you learn, right, by implementation, allows you to move into other types of roles, just like you said, as an RPA business analyst, or if you wanted to develop, you could also take training courses and become a developer. So it's really about retooling, right? Reskilling individuals. So all very good points. One of the things I wanted to kind of talk about today too was, and we've talked about it in some of our previous videos, with some of the causes for RPA failures, and we have a list of them, and one of the things that we've said early on in our video series is about targeting the wrong process, right? Which means, as part of your center of excellence, you definitely have to have a way of assessing processes, right? Having the ability to create that pipeline. But not only that, but you need to have the skills, right? As we've just talked about, you need to have the right skills to do production ready automations, because it's clearly a difference between something that is in a development or test environment and perhaps attended versus unattended versus one that is in a production environment. What are some of the other things that you see as common failures for RPA programs?
Well, I think that the applying not agile methodologies to RPA is a mistake, and it's a common failure, right? You have a very large, very heavy layer of bureaucracy built in IT, and that same approach to other larger projects is used for RPA. So that's a common mistake we do. Also, not looking after bots once they're in production, right? So not setting up a proper deployment into production, but also setting up roles and responsibilities in production, because there are process roles and there are IT roles in production, right? Once the bots are up and running, who's gonna monitor them and why? But who's gonna look at the report, right? So bots produce operational reports. Who needs to look at the operational reports? So setting up all these roles and responsibility and documents, and those are critical. And that's why CoEs become increasingly important, right? Because you need to take care of setting the right processes or selecting the right processes, having the right skills in place, monitoring bots in production, applying agile methodologies, not overlooking the proper IT infrastructure, adding another converging technologies to RPAs, such as BPMS, such as IDP or OCR. So all of these things that are happening, right? And in many times, there are just many things happening around automation. How do you bring them together with the proper governance and the proper rules? That's what CoEs are meant to do, and that's what CoEs are meant to be, that glue of automation, and not only from an RPA standpoint, but also through time, as you keep growing and maturing your CoE, bringing other hyper automation technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing, and you hit on IT there, it's really about partnering with IT, right? The RPA should not be an IT project. It's really a business project that you really need to partner with IT. So when we talk about programs, we definitely cannot overlook, IT and the infrastructure that is supported. And as you get more and more bots in production that are interfacing with the multiple applications, as we've said in previous video series, you need to make sure that testing your automations when you're doing upgrades to other underlying applications becomes increasingly more important, and should really be part of your software lifecycle development process.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. So many aspects to watch, right? Many different angles to governance, to people, process, technology. But how do you bring it together and how do you pull it together? I think if you really are serious about growing and scaling, a center of excellence is a must.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And basically, just as a key takeaway, implementing a center of excellence just really ensures the RPA fundamentals, really the foundation is embedded, not just deep in one organization, but effectively into the entire organization, right? and it allows everyone to experience the benefits that RPA provides to them. And you and I have seen it, right? When you start getting people involved and say, oh, this is great stuff, but we never even knew that this could happen like this. You know, the light bulbs come on and you just suddenly start to generate new ideas about what you want to do, but those new ideas have to be, you know, they have to be measured properly. They have to be analyzed properly and make sure you're implementing the right things. So I think that's the big takeaway from a CoE perspective. Any closing thoughts?
No, just get ready, right? Get ready for the next episode, right? We're already planning for the 5th episode, so stay tuned. It was great sharing with you again, Jen, today. And
absolutely.
I guess I'll see you.
Always fun.
See you in the next one. See you in the next one.
Take care, everyone. Appreciate you watching.
Thank you, guys.